Prince Edward and Sophie have just ignited a royal war that King Charles III and Queen Camilla may never recover from. At the center of the storm lies Bagshot Park, a hidden inheritance battle, and a priceless tiara personally gifted by Queen Elizabeth II to her favorite daughter-in-law. But when Camilla made one shocking move to seize control, Edward refused to stay silent. He hired elite lawyers and delivered explosive legal documents straight to the palace, documents the royal family never wanted the public to see. What those papers revealed could change everything. The youngest son of Queen Elizabeth was suddenly holding power the king believed he could reclaim. On March 25, 2026, senior legal experts marched into the Crown Estate offices carrying a confidential file packed with signed agreements, secret financial records, and years of carefully protected evidence. Every page proved one thing. What Prince Edward had inherited was never meant to be taken away. This was not a family disagreement anymore. It was a full-scale royal showdown. And the question tearing through Buckingham Palace was impossible to ignore. How did Prince Edward quietly secure something even the king cannot legally touch? The answer traces back to Queen Elizabeth II's final decisions before her death in September 2022. She saw the cracks forming inside the monarchy. She watched the growing battles over titles, money, loyalty, and control. And before her final days, she made one thing absolutely clear. The legacy of the Duke of Edinburgh was never up for negotiation.
Prince jokingly indicated his lowly role as a production assistant by carrying tea.
Before her final days, Queen Elizabeth II had already made her choice, and it was Prince Edward. This was not accidental. It was intentional, calculated, and deeply personal. The Queen secretly ensured that the legacy of the Duke of Edinburgh would pass directly to Edward, sending a powerful message to the entire royal family. Some things were never meant for King Charles to control.
That is the answer to this outrage.
That title had defined Prince Philip for more than 70 years. It was not just a royal honor, it was the role that shaped his entire life. And before Queen Elizabeth II died, she made one final, deeply personal decision. The title would go to the son she trusted most. Prince Edward, the quiet royal who stayed loyal, avoided scandal, and never damaged the crown. In April 2023, King Charles III officially fulfilled that promise by granting Edward the Duke of Edinburgh title. But the public only saw half the story. Because Edward inherited far more than a title. He inherited Bagshot Park. Not simply a mansion, but the powerful heart of the Edinburgh legacy itself. A massive 120-room Tudor Gothic estate spread across 51 acres inside Windsor Great Park. And in her final years, Queen Elizabeth quietly signed a private letter of intent linking Bagshot Park directly to the Duke of Edinburgh title forever. Prince Philip witnessed that document as his health faded. He understood exactly why it mattered. Without that protection, Edward could lose everything connected to the title his parents wanted him to carry. So Elizabeth made sure the title and the estate could never be separated. That was her final decision. But after her death, everything changed inside the palace. King Charles had long believed one dangerous idea, that becoming monarch gave him ultimate authority over royal titles, royal estates, and every inheritance tied to the crown. Under the banner of modernizing the monarchy, Charles believed he had the power to review royal assets, slash costs, restructure the family, and, if necessary, take back what others believed was permanently theirs.
Do you think a lot of that respect has ebbed away in recent years?
As I said earlier on, that it was a completely different...
Prince Edward and Sophie never imagined that the greatest threat to their future inside the monarchy would come not from outsiders, not from scandal, not from the media, but from inside Buckingham Palace itself. By the beginning of 2026, the atmosphere behind royal walls had changed completely. King Charles III had now been on the throne for several years, and the monarchy he envisioned was becoming more aggressive, more controlled, and far more centralized than many people expected. Publicly, the language coming from the palace focused on modernization, financial responsibility, and a slimmer royal structure. But privately, another reality was unfolding. Royal estates were being reviewed. Long-standing privileges were being questioned. Leases were quietly re-examined behind closed doors. And family members who once felt secure suddenly realized that nothing around them was guaranteed anymore. Then, attention shifted toward one of the most sensitive royal properties in existence, Bagshot Park. At first, very few people understood why that estate mattered so much. To the public, it was simply a grand royal residence in Surrey, a massive Tudor Gothic mansion surrounded by Windsor Great Park. But inside the royal family, Bagshot Park represented something far deeper. It represented permanence, independence, and the final personal wishes of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. That is why the fight over it became explosive. Prince Edward had spent his entire life in the shadow of bigger royal figures. For decades, he was treated as the quiet son, the one who avoided drama, the one who stayed loyal while others created chaos. He never pushed for power. He never demanded attention. And unlike several members of the family, he rarely embarrassed the crown publicly. Queen Elizabeth saw that. So did Prince Philip. And that is exactly why the Duke of Edinburgh title mattered so much. For more than 70 years, that title defined Prince Philip's identity. It was one of the most respected positions inside the monarchy. Philip carried it through wars, political crises, scandals, family breakdowns, and the complete transformation of Britain itself. Everyone assumed that title would always remain one of the crown jewels of royal prestige. But before Queen Elizabeth II died in September 2022, she reportedly made one final decision crystal clear: Prince Edward would inherit it. Not because of popularity, not because of politics, but because he had earned her trust. And when King Charles III officially granted Edward the Duke of Edinburgh title in April 2023, the public saw it as a touching tribute to Prince Philip's memory. What the public did not realize was that the title itself was only part of the inheritance. The real battle centered on Bagshot Park, because in Queen Elizabeth's final years, she reportedly signed a private letter of intent connecting the estate directly to the Edinburgh title itself. Prince Philip allegedly witnessed the document personally during the final stage of his life. That detail changed everything. Philip understood the monarchy better than almost anyone alive. He had spent over 7 decades watching how royal systems operated behind closed doors. He knew how quickly power could shift once a monarch died. He knew institutions protected themselves first, and he knew Edward could eventually become vulnerable. So together, Elizabeth and Philip reportedly created legal protections designed to keep Bagshot Park tied to Edward's position permanently. That was supposed to secure the future. Instead, it triggered war, because King Charles viewed the monarchy differently. For years, Charles believed that once he became king, ultimate authority over royal structures would naturally flow through him. Titles, estates, privileges, residences, everything would ultimately fall under his oversight. And by 2026, that belief had turned into action. Quiet reviews began taking place throughout royal operations. Financial teams started reassessing long-standing arrangements. Palace officials quietly discussed streamlining assets connected to non-central royals. Then Bagshot Park appeared on the list. To Charles and those around him, the estate represented something enormous, a property worth nearly £30 million sitting under the control of a royal household operating increasingly independent from Buckingham Palace. To Edward, however, Bagshot Park represented something completely different. It represented sacrifice. Because when the estate was first offered to him in the 1990s, it was not glamorous at all. The mansion was deteriorating badly. Years of neglect had left the property outdated and expensive to maintain. The Crown Estate reportedly considered alternative commercial uses because restoration costs looked overwhelming. There were even serious discussions about transforming the property into a hotel or conference center. That is how little confidence existed in its future. Yet Edward accepted the challenge anyway. In March 1998, he signed a long-term lease agreement for the property. The annual rent initially appeared low, only £5,000 a year, but the responsibility attached to it was enormous. The estate needed immediate restoration, costing millions. And Edward personally stepped forward. Using private money earned before becoming a full-time working royal, he invested over £1.3 million himself into repairs and rebuilding efforts. The total restoration eventually approached £3 million. Once the work was completed, his annual rent reportedly increased to £90,000, a market rate figure confirmed by official audits. That detail became extremely important later, because comparisons with Prince Andrew became impossible to ignore. Andrew reportedly spent years benefiting from far more generous arrangements while contributing far less financially. Yet it was Edward, the brother who followed the rules and quietly paid his way, who eventually found himself under pressure. But Edward was smarter than many people realized. Years earlier, he had already prepared for the possibility that royal politics could change. In 2007, through Eclipse Nominees Limited, he reportedly paid £5 million to extend the Bagshot Park lease to 150 years. That move fundamentally altered the situation. Now, Edward held long-term control backed by serious private financial investment and legal agreements that could not easily be dismantled. And by 2026, Bagshot Park had become one of the most valuable royal residential assets outside direct crown control. Suddenly, financial motives entered the picture. The estate was now reportedly worth around £30 million. And if the Crown estate regained control over it, enormous profit potential existed. That is when pressure allegedly intensified. Palace discussions reportedly began focusing on whether Bagshot Park should remain connected to Edward long-term. Behind closed doors, the language centered on restructuring and efficiency. But Edward's legal team saw something else entirely. They saw an attempt to weaken the independence Queen Elizabeth had deliberately protected. Because without Bagshot Park, the Duke of Edinburgh title becomes symbolic rather than powerful. A title without a foundation. A royal without an independent base. A future generation left vulnerable. Prince Philip had feared exactly that, which is why the March 25, 2026 legal confrontation became so dramatic. That morning, senior lawyers representing Prince Edward reportedly arrived carrying a detailed legal file built over years of preparation. Inside were lease agreements, maintenance records, financial investments, restoration contracts, Crown estate communications, and the explosive letter of intent signed by Queen Elizabeth and witnessed by Prince Philip. Every document supported one argument. Bagshot Park was never meant to be temporary. The legal strategy focused on three critical points. First, Edward personally invested millions into restoring the estate. Second, Queen Elizabeth explicitly tied the property to the Duke of Edinburgh title. Third, Prince Philip formally supported and witnessed those protections before his death. And that created a problem Buckingham Palace could not easily solve, because overturning the arrangement risked undermining the authority of Queen Elizabeth herself. Yet while that battle unfolded, another crisis exploded at exactly the same time, one that made the situation even more personal. It involved Sophie. Earlier in 2026, officials connected to Queen Camilla's office reportedly arrived for what was described publicly as a routine jewelry audit. But the audit focused heavily on one specific piece, the anthem tiara. This was not just another royal jewel sitting forgotten in a vault. Queen Elizabeth II personally commissioned the tiara for Sophie's wedding in 1999. It incorporated antique elements from Queen Victoria's collection and became deeply associated with Sophie throughout her royal life. For years, it was the only tiara Sophie regularly wore publicly. And that mattered because Sophie reportedly never enjoyed the same royal privileges granted to more senior women in the family. She rarely received access to grand state jewels. She occupied a lower-profile position for decades despite years of loyal service. The anthem tiara became her identity inside royal ceremonial life. Then palace lawyers allegedly raised a shocking argument. Because historical royal materials were used in the tiara's construction, officials suggested it could legally qualify as crown property rather than Sophie's personal possession. The implication was devastating. Sophie could lose ownership entirely and be forced to request permission whenever she wanted to wear the tiara she received on her wedding day. For Edward, that crossed a line, because the issue was no longer about jewels. It was about whether Queen Elizabeth's personal gifts could suddenly be reclassified after her death. And if that precedent succeeded, nothing inside the royal family would remain secure anymore. Edward's legal team responded immediately with what reportedly became one of the most explosive documents in the entire dispute, a deed of gift signed personally by Queen Elizabeth II in 1999. The document clearly identified the anthem tiara as Sophie's private wedding gift. Not state property, not temporary property, not crown-controlled property, private property. That single document reportedly destroyed the legal foundation of the palace's claim. But emotionally, the issue cut even deeper. Sophie had once publicly referred to Queen Elizabeth as Mama during a royal speech, a deeply revealing slip showing how close their relationship had become over the years. After losing her own mother young, Sophie reportedly viewed Elizabeth as the maternal figure she never fully replaced, which meant the attempt to challenge ownership of the tiara felt profoundly personal. And then the situation escalated further. Edward's lawyers reportedly warned Buckingham Palace that if pressure over Sophie's jewelry continued, private correspondence written by Queen Elizabeth herself could be released publicly. Those letters allegedly confirmed Elizabeth's desire for Sophie to retain full ownership of her personal gifts. More dangerously, some reportedly included difficult comments regarding Camilla. That possibility terrified palace officials, because King Charles had spent decades rebuilding Camilla's public reputation after years of controversy surrounding Princess Diana, public resentment, and royal division. Any suggestion that Queen Elizabeth privately remained distant or cold toward Camilla could destroy years of image rehabilitation overnight. By the evening of March 25, 2026, the anthem tiara reportedly remained in Sophie's possession. But Edward took no chances. The tiara was allegedly moved into a high-security private vault controlled directly by his own protection arrangements. As tensions exploded behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, the battle stopped being a simple royal disagreement and turned into something far more dangerous, an emotional civil war inside the monarchy itself. Then came the moment that changed everything. Princess Anne entered the fight. Known for her cold discipline and unwavering loyalty to Queen Elizabeth's legacy, Anne reportedly walked into the palace ready for confrontation. According to insiders, she warned King Charles that if Queen Elizabeth's signed wishes could be ignored after her death, the very foundation of royal authority would begin to collapse. Then she delivered the chilling line that allegedly silenced the room. "If our mother's signature means nothing now, then yours will mean even less later." That statement struck at the heart of the monarchy's survival, because the crown depends on continuity, trust, and respect for a monarch's final decisions. And fiercely defended both Bagshot Park and Sophie's treasured tiara, insisting they were protected by Queen Elizabeth's direct written wishes. She reportedly made it clear that once the palace begins reversing private royal agreements, no royal would ever feel secure again, not even the king himself. The conflict intensified further when Anne allegedly hinted she could support deeper investigations into financial matters connected to Queen Camilla's office if pressure against Prince Edward and Sophie continued. Suddenly, Buckingham Palace realized this was no longer a quiet family dispute. The monarchy had split into two powerful camps. On one side stood King Charles and Queen Camilla, pushing for a smaller, tightly controlled royal institution. On the other stood Princess and Prince Edward and Sophie, quietly backed, insiders claim, by Prince William and Catherine, defending the traditional values Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip spent decades protecting. Then came the devastating legal reality. Charles's own advisors reportedly concluded that Edward's position was impossible to defeat. Bagshot Park remained protected. The tiara remained Sophie's private property. Queen Elizabeth's documented wishes stood firm. Quietly, the palace backed down. Prince Edward had won, defending his home, his family, and his mother's final legacy against the institution itself. But the victory came with a heartbreaking cost. Behind the public smiles and royal appearances, insiders say the bond between King Charles and Prince Edward may now be shattered forever. One brother had been forced to use lawyers against another brother's crown, a fracture that may never truly heal. And now, hidden behind palace walls, two rival visions of the monarchy are reportedly fighting for the future of the royal family itself.